Just when I think that Steve Kerr could be trusted again, of course, the Warriors come out with this kind of effort against the Clippers. Well, anytime the Warriors play a team like the Clippers where they have a lumbering big like Zubac, I mean, all of you should know the answer by now. The guy should be taken advantage of copiously because he is a weakness in the Clippers scheme of things if you put him at the top of the arc against the most lethal guy from there ever, that's Steph Curry. And, well, they didn't employ any of those actions until the second half began. You could have used plenty of that throughout the first half as well. I'm not saying that you have to spam it all day and night, although that's not really a bad game plan if you consider how impactful a guy like Zubac is to their overall offense and how much easier it is for him to guard the motion offense because he can just lay back and chill. That's just not a good game plan. You're just letting the other team do whatever it is that they want to do just for the sake of, oh, well, we're just going to run what we do, which is the motion offense, which is like run a bunch of random stuff and see who gets open. And then meanwhile, Steph Curry's not involved enough. Everybody else is turning the ball over left and right. Like I always say, there is a balance to be had with the motion offense. I really honestly can't stand this offense. I feel like it's just completely backwards, and I've been living in clown world ever since Steve Kerr joined this team. Whatever it is that he should do, I feel that he does it backwards, right? It's like, well, if you have the greatest offensive weapon the game has ever seen, you would think that a coach would properly recognize and take advantage of that and be like, you know what? A lot of our possessions are going to go through Steph because he makes the game so easy, not only for himself, but everybody else. But that effect that he has in terms of making his teammates better gets greatly diminished when he's off the ball because now he's not dictating the action. He's hoping that guys like Draymond, Wiggins, Trace, Lindy Waters, whoever else are the ones who are executing in the most elite way. And that's not really the type of basketball that they have been playing this season, which is why I've been so excited about the change and shift in the way they're playing offense. And it's almost like Steve said, you know what, we're 10-2, we're in good shape. I think it's time to go back to my old offense, the thing that hasn't been working all this time, going too small when everything is on the line and just kind of reverting to the old ways somehow or another. He made the exact same mistakes against the Clippers in this game that he did in the first game that they lost to. They're 10-3 on the season now, and 2 of those losses have come against this mediocre-ass Clippers team. It's really, truly sad. The Warriors should not be losing to a team like that. There were a lot of issues tonight. Oh my goodness. This was a classic Steve Kerr disaster class. So you come out lackadaisical from the jump from an offensive standpoint. You don't take advantage of Zubac whatsoever. You allow him to play drop coverage all day and just let him get away with it. Nice game plan. Oh, and then you replace Trace Jackson-Davis, your only big for this game outside of slow-mo, with GP2. I mean, what in the world are we doing here? You're going with these small-ass lineups, and the Clippers have their own iterations of smaller lineups, but their smaller lineups are better organized and generally just a little bit bigger than the Warriors. So when the Warriors decide to go to these small lineups, they don't really have an advantage against their version of the small lineup. So the Warriors have to equalize and make sure, hey, well, if we're not getting an advantage in this way, let's make sure that we're getting some advantages in other ways. A guy like Trace does that for you. It almost seems like Steve refuses to recognize and realize that the players he has have very specific positions to play. As soon as I saw him put out a lineup of slow-mo at center and Jonathan Kuminga at the power forward spot, and you have Buddy Hield a hole on defense on top of that, well, what exactly do you think is going to happen defensively? Who is holding it down for that unit and group from a defensive standpoint? Right? Because power forward and center spot, that's where your backline defenders are. Draymond, Looney, Trace, these types of guys. Slow-mo is a very versatile defender, but I almost feel like he's a better defender from the perimeter than he is inside the paint against bigger guys. I don't think he's the type of guy that you can just stick to the 5 position and expect him to be an anchor of a defense. No. He is a tweener power forward. He's 6'9", right? So that's actually kind of a tweener-ish, but these days that's the normal going height for power forwards, right? So he's a power forward. He's not a shot blocker, so he's not a deterrent at the rim, okay? And now you put Jonathan Kuminga at the 4 and you give him all this responsibility again of help rebounding over your own guy, boxing out every single possession. help defense. As usual, you're asking him to do too much. And then you got Buddy Hield. And amongst that group, you got a non-connector in Moody and Potts, who's been struggling his ass off. That is not a good unit to run. Steve Kerr ran that copiously in the second half. Trace actually in the third quarter had an excellent stretch. The team initially in the third quarter got out to a 17-9 start. I immediately see GP2 walking over to the bench at the 6-minute mark. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Why are you taking Trace out this early when this unit is winning their minutes against the Clippers to begin the third quarter? And the worst part of all, Trace never got back into the game in the fourth quarter. Again, it's like Steve Kerr forgot that in the earlier part of the season, the way they were able to win those games was going big. Okay, they went big. They went Looney and Kyle Anderson at power forward and center, and they would put Jonathan Kuminga at the 3. I literally talked about this after the Grizzlies game and complimented Steve Kerr and the coaching staff for making sure that Kuminga, despite having a tough matchup in front of him, was well protected from a defensive standpoint. I understand that Looney was unavailable for this game. Well, that's where you can play Trace a little bit more, isn't it? Instead, he plays 20 minutes. The Warriors decide to go small for the remainder of the fourth quarter. That silly bench unit does nothing. That slow-mo JK, Buddy Hield, Pods, and then they try to stick GP2 in there instead of Moody, and that was a slightly better, but ultimately it wasn't impactful enough for the Warriors to actually win out or come anything close to outplaying the Clippers doing that. So if you can't do that, then that's not the right lineup. You're just trying to survive. And why the heck are you trying to survive? The starters, Steph Curry, played 32 minutes in this game. Hey, Steph Curry in his last game didn't even play the fourth quarter. What are you saving him for? He should be fresh, and they needed him as much as possible in this game. Are you serious about winning this game or no? If you're serious, then you would do all the right things to ensure that your team has the best opportunity to try to win this game. But it's hard to do that when the coaching staff, Steve Kerr, is making these nonsensical, casual decisions where like, oh yeah, we turned the ball over 19 times, running this offense that's going nowhere, and the Clippers are reading it like a book. But let's make no adjustments. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. What? Andrew Wiggins, fine offensive game. 29 minutes. This guy shot 7 of 12 from the field and scored 22 points and played 29 minutes in a 3-point game. What? The Steve Kerr tax never fails to strike at some point, right? You know, I think I'm going to have to make a separate video at some point and just outline exactly what positions each player should play, because Steve Kerr can never figure this out. He keeps putting Jonathan Kuminga at the 4 in various games, and you're completely risking the game. You want to hang your hat on defense, and then you put out a front court of defenders that are just not good enough. And, you know, obviously Slow-Mo is more capable than, say, somebody like Dario Saric, who was just a complete and utter disaster no matter where you put him on the floor. But you think back to last season, Steve played Dario Saric and Jonathan Kuminga at the power forward and center spot for a chunk of the season, and then wondered why they would have these gigantic leads and constantly blow it game after game after game. It's because you put out non-defenders like that at those positions. Well, you're giving the other team unprecedented momentum, and when a team, any NBA team, builds that kind of momentum, it's hard to stop, even if it's the bottom feeders of the league. I don't know when Steve Kerr is going to get over his little silly ideological belief that the game of basketball is positionless, especially in the NBA. It is not. They should have learned this lesson last season. And I felt like how this season has gone, they have largely learned that lesson of understanding which players can play what positions. I mean, this is just the basics of basics when it comes to identifying what pieces you have on the chessboard. You know, you're trying to make queen-like moves with a player who can only move like a rook or a knight. You have to strategize better, and the first order of doing that and being able to do that is ensuring you know which players can do what things and which players cannot do what things. It's always some of the basics that Steve Kerr just seems to fail to understand. Like, it blows my mind. I'll probably have to do another separate video as well in regards to their youth situation. I am so over it. Moody, Kuminga, like, I'm really just over the imperfections of these players and how unready they are in terms of being viable to contend for a title come playoffs. You guys know over the summer and in the preseason, I talked about the potential need for them to consolidate because they are too deep and they have some redundant pieces, and it's just like, well, who needs to sit, right? Well, some players have to eventually sit. In the case of tonight's game, again, the starters didn't get the proper minutes that starters should get in any typical game that is really close. They need to start shoring up the situation, and I do feel like more than ever that they need to consolidate that bench. Get some of these young guys, package them together, send them to a team where they can thrive. Look at the Raptors, man. Look at RJ Barrett and the things that he's doing. You look at a guy like Emmanuel Quickly and what he's been able to do since joining that team and how they view him. And it's like, hey, well, you might not want to try to contend for a title with those guys. You might not want to try to be a serious team while trying to be a true contender with flawed players who aren't necessarily ready for those kinds of scenarios quite yet. Well, the Warriors have been going through that with their young players for the last 4 freaking years. They still can't crack the starting lineup. They tried them. It doesn't work. They still have fundamental problems, and when the playoffs come around, you just know that Moody is never going to be ahead of guys like GP2, Melton, maybe even Buddy Hield to an extent. He's a nice player, but it's neither here nor there when it comes to his fit with this particular team. Jonathan Kuminga wants $200 million. What are we talking about? The guy played 19 minutes tonight, had some good moments, but at the end of the day, there are these weird plays that happen where it just breaks the momentum. Kuminga loses Powell with 5 seconds left in the second quarter, allows him to get a free layup. These are the kinds of goofy things that can never happen come playoffs. So what makes the front office or Joe Lacob believe that, these things are happening in the regular season? Somehow you think going into the playoffs when even some of the best players around the league are eventually exposed for whatever weaknesses they have in their games. Remember how I said I wanted Melton in the starting lineup because he's a blend of GP2 and Buddy Hield, right? So Melton is kind of like a consolidation piece that is a little bit of both of those qualities, an offensive player and a defensive player, thereby a two-way player, which is about as complete as you can ask for out of a rotational piece. This is what I'm trying to say is you put a guy like Moody and Kuminga together and bring in a consolidation piece that makes more sense for what the Warriors may need to do in order to make sure that they're the strongest possible going into the playoffs, because there are a lot of powerful teams and you want to make sure that you're as deep as possible that is viable in the playoffs and not just the regular season. And if you're a Warriors fan, this might hurt, but let me give you one name for example. Jalen Johnson of the Atlanta Hawks. That guy is averaging 10 rebounds per game and 5 assists per game. Needless to say, he's getting more opportunities as a starter, sure. But he's 6'8", has a 7'2" wingspan. That's better than both Kuminga and Moody. He also gets a block and 1.5 steals per game. That sounds like a guy that can do a lot of things on the floor. And as you know, part of the reason why I don't want guys like Kuminga and Wiggins at the power forward spot when they go smaller is because of their lack of ability to rebound more consistently. Well, when you bring in a guy that can give you 10 rebounds per game, and I feel like this is the type of player that you might be able to get when you combine somebody like Kuminga and Moody together and roll it into one. Sadly for the Warriors, Jalen Johnson was in the same draft class as Kuminga and Moody and has developed way better than these two guys. And again, Kuminga and Moody, maybe they would be developing better if they were on another team and got bigger opportunities, needless to say. But either way, we know what the Warriors need. They need a guy who can viably play the power forward spot when the Warriors decide to go small, because Steve Kerr is freaking obsessed with it. So you need to make sure that the roster has guys that make sense in terms of being able to do those things. And neither Kuminga nor Moody can play the power forward position. So while they may be able to get away with, playing Kuminga at the 3 at times to close the game, have Wiggins at the 4 and pray for the best, or hope that the other team doesn't have a 4 that can overpower these guys. Let's say like the Nuggets, for example, when they have Aaron Gordon, he will overwhelm the likes of Wiggins, Kuminga, and Moody in the paint. They can't really even put up a fight against that guy. And they need pieces that can. So this is what I'm talking about when it comes to consolidation and such. At the end of the day, to me, this is just a really terrible loss, and it's on nobody but the coaching staff for the game plan that they came out with and the casual nature of it, as if they didn't really mind if they end up losing this game. It's completely silly, but this is how Steve Kerr likes to operate. So I am the last person who is surprised when I see things like this. Anyway, guys, I'm trying to get these immediate reactions post-game out as quickly as possible instead of 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Part of it is because of all the editing that I do when I make these videos. And if you don't mind, I may have to curtail on some of that editing in order to get the content out quicker to you guys. Let me know how you feel about that. Anyway, I did post a video earlier today. It was a breakdown of Steph Curry against the Celtics. And well, you look at how he was used against the Celtics versus how he was used against the Clippers, and it's almost as if a different coach was coaching that Celtics game versus who was coaching the game tonight. But yes, be sure to check out that Steph Curry film breakdown video against the Celtics where he showed complete and utter two-way dominance. And that's actually only part 1. I'm still working on part 2. So be on the lookout for that. The Warriors have 3 more games coming up this week against the Hawks, the Pelicans, and the Spurs. I would not underestimate the Hawks given the situation that's developing over there. Trae Young is back on the ball. Dyson Daniels is an incredible defender. They have a lot of wings. If you guys remember what happened against the Hawks last season for the Warriors, man, they lost in overtime because Steve Kerr decided to go with a 4-guard freaking lineup and they got out to a 2-11 deficit against the Hawks in overtime in the first 2 minutes, and that was the end of the game. That's when Steph Curry scored 60 points, which none of us really remember because at the end of the day, it was an L. Can the Warriors make up for this loss and go 3-0 for the rest of the week? Sure. From a standing standpoint, these teams are not even close to the Warriors. But then again, neither are the Clippers, and the Warriors just lost to them soundly. Hopefully, Looney will be back for the remainder of the week. Obviously, they missed him. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.